if that's okay. And maybe we'll get started because I do want to make sure we just take no more than an hour. So make it as useful of an hour as possible for both of you. I have some things in mind, but really the most important thing is that you get a chance to kind of tell me where you're at and what your questions are, and I can build that in. So I'll just share my screen, but we'll keep this kind of, we'll keep it informal. I did put something in the chat. Just wondering if you could both go to the chat and download this document that I've put in there. If you can't, I can supply you with a link instead. So
it is not in the chat.
Yeah, it's not there.
Okay, so I'm gonna try to put it back in there. It shows in my chat, but maybe. Okay, badly, Heather. So this, what I'm sharing with you is an example of what I would consider like a great teaching philosophy statement. And I have others that I'll give you links to as well. How about I do it this way? Just going to give you the link, and that way we don't have to worry about the file not working or something. And you should be able to just download this. So the only thing about the one I was showing you is that I made a few comments in it already, but that's okay. I'll share that one with you too. So just take that, and we're going to use it in just a minute. So if you don't mind. So this is a teaching philosophy statement from a woman at the University of Calgary in Canada. And the University of Calgary has one of the best teaching and learning centers, kind of like our Learning Institute in Canada. And they do a wonderful job in providing resources and support for faculty to develop teaching philosophy statements, amongst other things as well. So that's why I really like to go, I often go to their website to get resources to share with our faculty, because I find that they're just fantastic. So can you see my screen, Hamna?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so before we start, and we're going to start by looking at that philosophy statement. What are your questions? I just want to know what your questions are about teaching philosophy statements, and also what you have to write one for. Like, why are you here? So maybe Amna, we'll start with you, and then.
Okay.
Yeah.
See, I'm interested, actually. I wrote a teaching philosophy once, and I wasn't quite sure. I thought it was too much. There was too much of theory in there, the theory behind my philosophy, you could say. And I felt that then it was lacking in terms of, putting in my methodology. How do I put in that methodology? What exactly? I mean, I Googled online how to write a teaching philosophy because I needed it to be, when I needed it to be promoted to assistant professor at that time. So I don't think it does the job. Also, I have 1 year to go and my contract expires, and I do want to apply for extension of contract as well as promotion. So I'd really like to put in, I really want to show them how much I base my teaching on extensive research. How do I go about doing that?
Yeah. Okay, great. So I think one of the best things we can do, like I am going to walk you through what search committees look for and what makes a good philosophy statement. But I think one of the best things we can do is look at examples, right? Yeah. So we'll do that, and then I'll give you more examples that you can peruse on your own, and hopefully that. The other thing is about getting feedback on them.
Yes.
So if you get to a point where you'd like feedback, I'm happy to look at it and just give you my 2 cents. So we can talk about that later. Ramsha, what about you? What are your questions about philosophy statements, and why are you here?
Launa, as you know, I am PhD candidate at STSB. So I
Yeah.
started teaching as adjunct faculty last year. I'm in the completion of my PhD, and then I have to apply as a professor in other universities. So
Okay.
I need to write my CV and need to write a good teaching philosophy statement there, so that I'm able to express myself well, and also others are able to judge me well. So
Yeah.
I really need that, and that is why I'm here.
Excellent. Okay, well, let's work on getting you jobs. No, this does play a part in it. And you know, when you're applying, as you know, for faculty positions, teaching is like half of your work, right? I mean, not quite half, but half of it. And in some places, if you're applying for teaching track, it's a lot of your work. So committees do look at these statements. They're not in a portfolio or an application just because it's the thing to do. They do look at them amongst other things like your course evaluations and things like that. So course evaluations they tell us a little bit of the picture about who you are as a teacher, but not very much. Your philosophy statement is designed to help you to express like, what do you believe about student learning and about teaching? And then how do you actually enact that in your teaching? And what impact does it have on students? That's the ultimate goal here, okay? All right, well, I think you've come to the right place. So I've just sent you the exemplar teaching philosophy statement. I've just picked one, there's many there, but I thought this was a good one, kind of easy to read, and it really hits on some of the things that I want you to look at for your own statements. So I'm actually going to give you a few minutes to read as much as this one as you can. So I think if we take like let's just say we'll just go with 5 minutes, see how much you get through. I know people read at different speeds. So if we need more time, we'll take more time, but because I wanna then look at it together. So let's just go with 5 minutes. If you can start reading Heather Addy's teaching philosophy statement. Just let me know when you're finished or if you need a little more time.
Yeah, I'm done.
Ramsha, do you need a few more minutes or?
Yes, 1 or 2 minutes only.
Sure, sure, yeah.
Yes, done.
Okay, thank you. Thank you both. All right. So just what are your first thoughts? What do you notice? Just give me some points about what's sticking out to you about this TPS.
You need to be collaborative and engage the students instead of lecture.
And what was the first thing? Engage students.
Collaboration,
Okay. So these are examples of what in her philosophy?
to making them learn more, making them
Okay. Yeah.
understand,
How students
learn.
learn, understand, right? So these are examples of what she believes of how learning happens, right? Of that students need to be engaged and they need to collaborate, and that's when like good learning can happen, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. What else did you notice about either what's in the statement, how it's written, how it sounds to you?
I love the fact that it was very informally written. I tend to write such things in with a very formal writing style, very academic, and I
Yeah.
love that it was very conversational, very informal, for using the first person, and so that certainly made it very easy to. I mean, it was very quick reading, very easy to understand. Um, I really liked how each theory point, when she mentioned that, okay, fine, collaborative class structure, incorporation of teaching strategies, dialogue. For that, she gave very specific examples from her teaching practice, from her classes. So I think this was quite useful for me. Though there's no conclusion, so I'm kind of wondering.
So, okay, good. This is great. How did you, I'm just going to pick up on the point you said about no conclusion.
Yeah.
So how did you notice she did conclude? Like she ended it with something. What did you notice about what she talked about in that last paragraph?
I mean, she's talking about reflection and feedback, right? And how important that is. And she's talking, then she's like, I have also found involvement with science education society is invaluable. And she is concluding that particular point about feedback. But then I feel that there needs to be something more. I don't know if I'm right or wrong, but that's the academic writing teacher in me.
Yeah,
So,
no, good. There's that sense that she's talking about like her own learning, right? Like that
yeah,
reflection,
what
feedback, and
she's
ongoing development is important.
yes.
You're right, but as a reader, maybe you would have preferred also to have a little more of a closure there. That's
Yeah.
fine. Yeah. Ramsha, any other points you want to make about how it was written or something that stuck out to you that is different from what we have here?
Well, there were also many other things like he thought back to how he was teaching and what teaching methodology that he was using previously and how he can bring changes because when he revisited and the students were not able to recall the concepts from the biology course that he indicated in the teaching statement, then he thought what was the issue behind. So reflecting back whether the students are able to really learn those things instead of cramming and apply those things. He understood that thing from his own effort. So he really made an effort. Then he joined committees for that. So at the end, collaboration, dialogue between student and instructor, the communication is very essential in order to understand two-way communication instead of one way in which we only giving lecture to the students.
So there's a lot in there about this person's, her name is Heather, Heather's belief about, what is needed to support students' learning, right? The collaboration, the engagement and whatnot. But I think what's interesting that you picked out, Ramsha, here is that there was a sense of a bit of a backstory about where she started and then what she experienced, and then she made changes as a result of seeing that learning wasn't really happening the way she thought it would. So there was this kind of evolution of development in part of her philosophy statement, right? Excellent, good. So I'll just leave it at that for now. I'll show you a few of my notes that I made on here before we look at how do we actually do this. So I thought it was interesting how she used a quote to hook the reader.
Yeah.
And there's many different things you can use to hook the reader. Some people use a quote like this. Some people use a metaphor. So some people say, I see teaching and learning, my role as a teacher as akin to a gardener, where I have to tend to all of the different flowers and the diversity in my classroom. Like, so some people really use a creative style like that to start off their philosophy and to kind of put a nice frame around it, if you know what I mean. Others are quotes, which is a very common thing to do. There's no rule about what you have to do. A TPS is very personal and individual. So if you are better at expressing yourself by connecting to a quote, then lovely. If you want to write a poem, then lovely. If you want to just write it more straightforward, like I started teaching because I was influenced by a great teacher in my past. Like, fine, that's okay. It's gotta come across as you. Amna has to sound like Amna. Ramsha has to sound like Ramsha. Don't try to sound like anybody else. So sometimes when we look at examples of others writing, we want to try to write in that style, and it ends up not sounding like us. So when you're using examples, which I do all the time when I'm doing these myself and when I'm doing other writing as well, and Amna, you probably teach this to your students in writing as well, is like one of the best ways you can learn is by, copying style, and then eventually you kind of come to your own. So same thing with the TPS, right? So what I found here, page 1 consists of background context, how she became the teacher she is today. This is a matter of personal choice. I find that she has a lot of background story. It's up to you whether you have this much or not. I personally think that more time should be spent talking about what you believe about teaching and learning and how you do that in your classroom and how you assess and how does it impact students. But that's, you'll read a lot of different examples and many people have a lot of contextual background. So that can work, okay? Nothing wrong with that. So where I've picked up on this now, I notice on the top of page 2 here, she has a statement that directly states the core themes or the components of her personal philosophy. So she said directly, I believe creating and maintaining this climate requires the following elements. Boom, 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 boom. So she's organizing her beliefs about teaching and learning around some themes. Okay, we'll call them components in the rest of the session today, okay? Themes or components. So you'll see here, I've just highlighted them. And she's actually even made the stylistic choice to put them in bold.
Yeah.
So that each theme is really a belief, or if you like to say a conception, right? A belief or a conception about teaching and learning. So I'll just scroll through really quickly. Then if you notice, each paragraph has a particular format. And here's the, here's the format of each paragraph. What's the belief? So she states that in bold. What are the strategies used to enact the belief? Which she talks about instruction and assessment, right? How does she teach? How does she assess? And then what's the impact on students? That, my friends, is the key piece here.
Yeah.
Committees who are looking at your teaching philosophy statement, they don't want to hear a very self-centered TPS that only focuses in on a teacher. They want to hear about, what do you have to say about students? What have you observed in your own self and in your own teaching about your impact on students, right? I mean, we could all sit here right now and say, I do this in the classroom and this is what my students think. This is what I've observed in their learning. Like, we can do that. One of the mistakes that people make, I think mistake is too harsh, but this might be touching on what you were talking about, where you got too theoretical, right?
Yeah.
Your teaching philosophy statement, it's very easy to get lost in writing, like you're writing an academic paper where you're trying to argue something or teach someone about something. Your teaching philosophy statement should avoid having things like teachers must do this, teachers should do this. That's making general statements about teaching. This needs to be about you. Okay, so I would, if I looked at your teaching philosophy statement, I would very easily be able to pick out whether you were preaching to us or whether you were actually talking about,
Yeah.
you know, your own beliefs in learning. It's quite easy to see that when you step back and look at something. So let's just look quickly at this here. I'm going to move the comment box out of the way. So in this case, let's just look at this one. I'll even use my nifty annotation tool here. So this one, oh, I guess I can't, maybe can't annotate a PDF. Yeah, okay, I can. So we're going to look at this paragraph for a second. And let's just ask ourselves, what is the belief that she expresses in this paragraph? Well, that one's easy because I highlighted it for you.
Yeah, exactly.
So she believes that she should use teaching strategies that give students more responsibilities for learning and the opportunity to apply what they've learned to authentic problems. That's a belief because yes, it's based in research and we know it's good, but another teacher might have a different belief about how to facilitate student learning. So we know that that's a belief. Then what are the strategies she uses to enact this belief?
Yeah. So
What are
that's
the strategies?
flipping the classroom. And then what I really like is that she has explained what that means without, like you said, being preachy and saying, oh, this is what flipping the classroom is all about, that using pre-reading and assigned reading sections and then short quiz.
So there's what it is, what her strategy is, and then what she means by that, right?
Yeah.
So, and this is a bit about what she means by that, sorry. And then she talks about assessment.
Yeah.
So strategies, when you use strategies to explain your beliefs, you're giving evidence. So a teaching philosophy statement needs to say, here's my belief, here's my evidence that I enact that belief in the classroom or in my teaching in some way, okay? And evidence is instructional strategies, assessment strategies, the things that you actually do, okay? Now, the last question that I have on here is the question about impact on students. So I can't scroll my comment here, but the last question we need to ask ourselves is, what is the impact of flipping the classroom and giving quizzes on these students? Does she talk about impact here? Impact is, yeah, go ahead, Ramsha.
Students find particularly challenging. So the impact is that the students will find challenging and then engage in doing that.
Good. So that's impact. She has experienced that this is the impact of these quizzes on students. So this is what we do about it. This is how I support them in meeting the challenge. They focus on during class, right? Here's another statement about how her strategies help students. It helps students to expert thinking, da 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 da. Okay, so it's quite. I hate to say follow a formula because a teaching philosophy statement you don't want it to be formulaic at all. But when you're writing one for the first time, or when you're trying to get away from a style that you don't like that you're using, sometimes it can be useful to like have a format like this to start with, and then go back and, you know, modify it and make it creative. But at least what this format does, it helps you get out the ideas in a coherent manner so that you're not crowding these ideas with, you know, big statements and generalizations about teaching and learning that, believe me, every committee every search committee has read them a billion times because people use them a lot. Like, you know, education is the gateway to all whatever, right? Like, you know, I mean, you know,
Yeah.
education should be for all. Like, these are things that, yes, those are very general, but we want the window into your classroom. That's what this has to be, right? And into your thinking about how teaching and learning happens and what it looks like in your classroom. Okay, so
Yeah.
we won't go through the whole thing here, but I think on your own, when you can take a look at kind of this, you know, this format of that. And what I'll do after this is I'll share this document with you, so you can just have my little notes there as a reminder of what those these questions are that I was getting you to ask. All righty. Do you want to make any other comments on this? I do have a bit more now to share with you that will help you to develop your own philosophy statements, but we can definitely talk more about this example. I did have another example to show you from that's written in a very different style. So I encourage you to look at a couple of different examples when I share the link with you a bit later. So, and you know, stop me when there's when there's something you want to spend more time on here. Okay, so here it is. I mean, you've seen now what we consider a good philosophy statement to look like. It's short. It's approximately 2 pages. Some of the examples that I will give you through the web link, some of them are a little lengthy, and I think the rule of thumb is usually 1 to 2 single space pages. Okay, you should be able to say it in that amount of time.
That's tough.
Yeah, it is, but sometimes if you can, like, that's why having a format, like having some kind of outline can help, and then you can still make that creative and make it your own. It just helps kind of give you some boundaries, I think. Yeah, and so the second point I think you gave great examples of is explains how you teach and why. So it's the belief behind, you know, what you do. Paints a picture, helps the reader to see you as a teacher. It's to see you teaching. So that's why we say, you know, show us, don't preach at us. You know, show, don't tell. So show. And you can show, how do you show us? Through evidence, through examples, just like we saw in Heather's philosophy statement. It's reflective and personal. It's discipline specific, and it takes into account the type of institution or position you're applying to. I would say be quite careful with that piece of advice, because you don't want to change it so much so that it doesn't become you anymore. It doesn't sound like you. But I think what I mean here is that if you're applying for a very specific position somewhere, that maybe you're applying a bit out of your comfort zone, but so you need to kind of think about tailoring it a bit. Like, so if it's a business, like if you were to now go apply to work in a business school, you know, you would want to tailor it a bit towards that discipline, use some of the language and whatnot, right? That's all that means there. So it's capable of standing alone, which means it doesn't rely on other pieces to, you know, to communicate who you are as a teacher and what you do. When you submit an application for a job, or some places actually ask you to submit a whole teaching dossier, which is, it's your philosophy statement, it is examples of your work, it's student evaluation, it's a whole package about teaching. Sometimes what they say is the teaching statement is the heart of the dossier, so that everything else in it needs to be evidence to support the statement, right? I would say in your case, if you don't have to submit a full teaching dossier, you know, you might want to think about if you have the space to give some supporting documents, such as some student evaluations, references, things like that, that might help you. And then it's Yeah, and this is what you would talk about in an interview. So the statement becomes your interview guide, in a sense, that when you're sitting there and you're being interviewed and asked about your approach to teaching, how you support students, you've got your statement in your mind, and that becomes kind of the guide for the conversation, right? So when they're well written with lots of examples of evidence and where you've explicitly talked about impact on students, that sets you up so nicely for a job interview. Because in a job interview, people want to hear specific examples, right?
Right.
When I was interviewing for for a K-12, a primary teaching position a long time ago in Korea, it was in a British school there. The best question he asked me was, if I walked into your classroom any given day, what would I see? What would I see happening? Right? And I was like, oh, I love that question. You know, because he wanted me to describe like what would be going on, what interactions would be happening. So a TPS can do that as well. Okay, so here are the key components that should come off, you know, should be talked about in your statement. And we'll go through each of these so you have some examples of what this means. So it's your conceptualization of learning. So what you believe about learning, what you believe about teaching. What are your goals for students? How do you know, what are your implementation and assessment strategies? So this is teaching and assessment strategies. And then your future as a successful university teacher. So it's almost like a personal growth plan. So that's why I asked you to look at Heather's TPS in that very last paragraph we talked about. That's number 5 here. She has chosen, instead of like a formal conclusion, she's chosen to end on, here's my vision of the possible for the future, right? So that can be a nice way to say, I'm a teacher who continues to learn and to grow and whatnot.
Right.
So
Excuse me,
yeah.
Launa, are you using the PowerPoint slide also? Because are these points on the PowerPoint slide?
Oh yeah, you can't see.
Yeah.
Sorry, thank you for stopping me. I'm clicking resume share, but it's not resuming share.
Yeah,
so.
now it's resumed. It's resumed.
Yeah, okay. So why don't we, we'll spend the next few minutes. I'll go through each of these, and what you'll see is, I'll just show you the first one. Yeah, so these are what the search committee looks for in your TPS. And Heather's is an example of this, that it's well done. Okay, so we can kind of demystify now what this would look like on paper, because you've seen one example. So I'll show you many more. Okay, so what I've done is I've put the examples of what these themes mean in the form of questions. So you might want to do some pre-writing and brainstorming on your own about the answers to these questions. And that'll actually help you generate the content for your TPS. Okay, so if you have to include all of these things, you know, what are some of the ways you can start thinking about these things? Well, take a look at these questions. So you could ask yourself, how does learning take place based on your observations and experience? What do you think happens during a learning episode? A learning episode is just, you know, a learning experience that's happening in your classroom. So I recommend like actually sitting down and doing some free writing about this. And free writing is just writing without judgment and without worry about spelling or grammar or ideas. It's just brainstorming writing, right? So these questions might help you get at what your conceptions of learning are. You may already know them. The other, very similarly, to really kind of get to the root of your conceptions of teaching, think about some of these prompts. How do you facilitate learning? Like, what are your strategies for that? Notice how the question is not, how do you teach, right? I mean, there's why do you teach the way you do there, but I'm asking you how you facilitate learning. And there's a difference there, right? And to make your TPS speak more to student learning rather than focus on the teacher, using this kind of language, such as this is how I support learning, this is how I facilitate learning, can really give your TPS a nice tone, right? And a nice, really grounded in that perspective that you really think about students first. What are my assumptions about teaching? So this again is, I believe teachers play this role, and I play this role in my teaching by doing this, right? Why do I teach the way that I do? So in Heather's TPS, she gave us that context, that background. And to me, that was a nice connection to why she does what she does today. She learned something from her experiences and she's made those changes. How do I motivate, challenge, and support students? How do I account for diverse learning preferences? How do I integrate diverse perspectives in my teaching? How do I vary my approach? You don't like, Amna, your case in point here, you don't teach the same way every time. You do lots of different things for particular reasons, because you do certain things because you want students to experience a certain kind of like learning opportunity, right? So Ramsha, Amna, you don't have to answer all of these questions in a TPS. These are, depending on who you are as a teacher, some of these may take more prominence than others. I would say, and some of these may just get covered when you're writing about something else anyway, but this is just to kind of ground you in thinking this way. I do think this one about integrating diverse perspectives in your teaching, that I would highlight that one because that's a really big issue these days, right, in our classrooms, and everybody's talking about diversity, inclusivity. So if you're applying for a job somewhere else or even at LUMS, like they're going to want to know like this kind of like, this kind of what your thinking is on here. So by including it in your TPS and what your thoughts are on that, that might help you to answer that question in an interview as well. And then the other component is goals for students. So why do you want students to learn? What knowledge, skills, attitudes are important for student success in your discipline? What am I preparing students for? We all have those in our head. And, if you look at your course learning outcomes too, like that might be articulated there. Okay, and as a result of learning the same kind of idea, what do I expect from my students in their careers, future lives, why? So again, those are broad, but those may help you to express your beliefs. Maybe one of them does, maybe none of them do, but they're there for you. Okay, there's a lot on here, but this is just to say, to get you to think about what strategies do you use as a teacher, both in terms of instruction and assessment, how, and then the last two questions are about feedback. How do you use student feedback? Or do you even collect student feedback to help you to improve your teaching? So how do you know students are learning? How do you know that they're following you? How do you know that they're happy in your classes too, right? I mean, that's important, but are they learning? That's the biggest, boldest question we can ask about ourselves as teachers. So, yeah, go ahead, Amna, please.
What if we collect data from our students regularly, other than the university mandated course evaluation, right? And we're collecting that data. Do you think that if we could put it somewhere, like just like images of it in an appendix, or should it be part of the main document? It's
Absolutely.
doable?
Yeah, I think that's great. And in the main document, you might want to say, so maybe, how in Heather's TPS, she wrote her last paragraph about growth and development and reflection. I mean, maybe that's a good place to talk about how you grow as a teacher now by hearing from your students. You collect feedback from them and you incorporate their suggestions. You share it back with them and why you do that, right? I think that's great. Now,
Okay.
some people in their TPS, I don't actually know, not in the TPS. Some people put some quotes from students, but I don't think that that's as appropriate unless you're applying for specific awards and things like that. You can decide. I wouldn't overdo it with that. But you can certainly have like a one pager of, you know, informal feedback that you collected at just what you're talking about. I'm not.
Right.
And my best advice is that if you can also include like a very short paragraph about your reflection on that feedback, because
Okay.
then anybody who reads it says, okay, before she was doing this and these are the results, and since she's started collecting regular feedback, this is her, you know, this is her reflection on how she's improved, right? So course evaluation data, feedback, it's most useful when you can show a change.
Yeah.
And sometimes you show that change by just like writing a brief statement to say, course evaluations were at this level before I started taking workshops and now they're here, like things like that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's that one. And then the last piece, again, is referring back to that last paragraph that we saw in Heather's TPS about you might want to talk about your future trajectory or your future growth for teaching. I would say this is especially important if you're applying for a teaching track position somewhere. You know, because you are going to be held accountable for your progress as a teacher and your research production and things like that within teaching, more so than a research track. But even the research track, I mean, it's 40% of your workload, right? So it's still important. If your teaching evaluations are really low, then that's going to be a problem, even if you're a star researcher, right? So you can see some of the questions here that might prompt you to think a little bit about how you've developed, what evidence do you have, how have you changed over time, maybe what you even might want to do, right? That's fine too. Like what are your future goals? So I think one of the things is that there's a lot, I'll just show you here. We'll talk about engaging the reader. We've already discussed some of these. We saw an example in Heather's TPS. How can we engage people, right? So the metaphor, the quote, something to hook the reader. I wouldn't use too many things like too many images and things like that. I mean, it's okay to put things like that in there, but I've seen them before where people like put too many and it almost takes away from the philosophy statement. So keep those things minimal and very purposeful. You know, I've also seen someone use like a banner that was a photograph that perfectly matched their metaphor. So it really actually enhanced the TPS. So it can go either way. Personal experience. We love stories about other people. We love because that's how we relate, but don't overload your TPS with stories. Like don't take 2 pages to tell your history and then the last page is the actual, you know, meat of what you do. Use language that's appropriate to your discipline and your audience. So I'm not where you were saying you might have struggled with being too theoretical and too exactly. So remember the people reading your statement, they might not be people who know education literature. They might not be people who know, because often they'll bring in, you know, people to sit on hiring committees that may be outside of the discipline too, right? So just keep that in mind. And then structure your TPS according to themes. That just helps the reader, guide the reader's eye as well. Think about it. Ramsha, do you do research?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. So you've written, I mean, and I'm not too, you've done your PhD. So we've all written a research proposal or even a grant proposal perhaps. And we know how helpful headings can be, or even in a journal article, headings can be as signposts for what the reader can expect. And I would say something similar in a TPS can be helpful if you find it is. Narrative first person, Amna, you picked that out right at the beginning of our session. It's okay to use I. I. It's fine, right? I mean, you don't want it to be all I, because then it's, you know, you want it to be my students as well, but first person, avoiding jargon as much as possible. If you explore some of the teaching philosophy statement examples that I'll give you, you'll notice that some people choose to sprinkle some references here and there. There's no rule to say you can't. It just use them sparingly and use them only when they're just helping you to connect, you know, to your own experience and your own evidence. So, you know, yeah, I would say don't load it up with, you know, all of this. But if there's been a source, a resource, or a scholar who's really had an impact on how you see teaching and learning, then maybe sometimes it is best to include them so that, you know, the reader also sees this is really grounded in, you know, in conversation with scholarship. So that can be good too.
So what is the ideal length of a teaching philosophy statement? How many pages?
Yeah, so in the beginning, on the first slide, I mentioned approximately 2 pages. So it's like usually people write between 1 to 2 single space pages for this. Yeah, and single space because also if you're putting this in a job application and you don't want that to go on and on and on. Sometimes you have limits, things like that. So
And our attachments will be separate. Our evaluations and anything we attach informally.
yeah. So it's just, I think it just reads nicer, I think, with, you know, in single space, single space. Yeah. Yeah, so I think you're either getting started for the first time or, you know, Ramsha, do you have a TPS or will it be your first time?
First time.
Okay, good. So this is, I mean, good for both of you. Amna, you want to revise yours quite a bit.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, sometimes I find, you know, starting from scratch, you know, you're a writer, so you know that, but it's up to you. There's probably great, you know, nuggets of information and ideas you have in your other one that you want to bring over into the new version. So here are some ideas. I think before you even look at those question prompts, you could just start thinking about what kinds of teaching experience do I have? And do those inform your beliefs, right? Another fun thing to do is to think about how would one of your students describe learning in your class? And then finally, what I find most effective is the third, and that's free writing on, you know, any of these question prompts that you find helpful. What I've done in the past is, since I know I want to cover like each of these, I'll take one question from one and just start free writing about that, see what I come up with, and then I might go back and then answer another question and see what I come up with. And before you know it, you have more pages than you need, but usually all that writing, you know, half of it will go away and sometimes you'll have some good ideas in there. So, so I will share now with you here. Actually, why don't I bring you to the site first and I'll show you. Okay, yeah, I'll reshare this. Okay, so here's the Taylor Institute for Teaching and Learning site, and here's the sample philosophies and dossiers. So the first part up here are what I was talking about, are the full dossiers, and often people have to create dossiers when they're applying for teaching awards. Which, by the way, we are hoping to implement here at LUMS as well as teaching awards. So we'll be helping faculty to go through this process. So there's those. So you can look, if you view one of the dossiers, don't know why now I'm not able to. Oh yeah, here we go. So if you view a dossier, for example, we'll take a look at this one. If it's, I'll let it load for a second. And then if you go lower, you have just the teaching philosophy statements part. So dossiers will have teaching philosophy statements plus all of the other evidence and reference letters and things like that, if you want to see what a full dossier looks like. But here's the statements. Here's Heather's, which we looked at. And you'll notice they're all different, like they're from different people. We have a teaching professor. We have some teaching assistants down here as well. People have written those. So you might, depending on where you're at in your career, you might want to look at someone who's similar. But I would suggest look at a couple of different ones because, you know, this person, Adam and Heather, will have very different styles of their, and you might see one that, you like it. This is what it makes sense for me to do as well. Or you might come up with one on your own. These are probably pretty big files. Yeah, so here's what a dossier looks like. I'll just flip through. You can see this is way more comprehensive of a picture of this student's or of this teacher. But you notice the first thing is the statement of teaching philosophy, and everything else right down to page 24 is kind of linked to that. It's evidence of that. So, you know, this person has a lot of, in a dossier, usually there's separate sections for evidence and there's, yeah, so you can get a sense of, so here's their philosophy statement. They've organized it. This person has a quote. And then they deliberately say, I've organized my teaching philosophy statement around 4 principles, right? So they, right up front, they tell the reader, you can do it that way if you want to, or you can say it in another way, but organization is kind of the key here, right? And I read a lot of teaching philosophy statements in my class at the School of Education here at LUMS. This is one of the assignments I give my students. And the first draft is always, as first drafts are, quite disorganized. But then after they get feedback and realize how that they might be able to organize it around their key beliefs or themes, it really comes together nicely. It tells a more cohesive picture rather than scattered ideas about teaching and learning. So anyway, you can see that. And I think this one's quite long. It was 2.5 pages, I believe. So anyway, so a couple of minutes left. Ramsha, over to you if you have any pressing questions or if there's something in here that you want me to go back to, up to you.
Yeah. No, I think I'm good because I think all my questions and more, that's what I've gotten. So I'm like, lots to think about. Fantastic.
Yes,
Great.
I also got a lot of stuff because I had to write from the scratch. So I think a good part will be to go through certain teaching philosophy statements in the link that you just showed to me,
Yeah.
and then start writing.
Yeah, exactly. Take a look at a couple and then start whatever your process is for writing. You know, go with that. Here, I'll put it. Did I put it? I'll put the link to all of the statements that I just showed you. So that's the main link. I'll also, I'm going to follow up in an email with the recording of this, and I'll also put links to this link, and I'll also send you Heather's TPS with my comments on it. Good.
No, I think I'm also going to work from scratch and come up with a new one, completely new one. I don't want to look at the previous one as such. Yeah.
Great. So I've set up time on, I think it's December 2nd. If you wanted another session like this, but just for talking and feedback. So if you want to come back on December 2nd and just meet again, and I don't think we can, you know, go through your TPS point by point, but bottlenecks, like if there's any challenges you're having, or if you want to share a sample, we can definitely do that and learn from one another. So I'll keep that almost as like an office hour, and we'll go from there.
Great. Sounds wonderful.
Good.
Yeah.
Nice to see you both again.
Thank you so much. This was very informative. Thank you.
Welcome.
Very helpful.
Let your colleagues know that No, we can do this again. If we have another group of people who are interested, we'll do it again, right? That's what we're here for.
Great.
This is our first time doing something like this, and I think more people were interested, but it's what
It's the
happens. People
timing because the teaching going on and everything,
it's
you know.
never a good time, but
Exactly. That's true.
but no, I'd be happy to do this again with others. So yeah,
Great.
okay. Have a great day.
Thank
Have a
you
good
so
week.
much. Have a good
Bye bye.
Bye.